the idea that there is no death, the Son of God is free, which is lesson 163, I think. Yes, it is, 163. Does something that really kind of, this is why I mentioned you, Aunt Eric, on this point. I think it was yourself that said on Sunday that what I've been saying a lot recently is we need to take the focus off the crucifixion and bring it to the resurrection, which is true. But that doesn't mean to say we have to turn away from the crucifixion completely. On the contrary, we've got to face it. And we've got to face it from the point of view of the resurrection. That's described in the course as rising above the battleground. But the essence of it is that we have to face it. Now, in this particular lesson is a really good example, because 90% of the script in this lesson is to deal with the problem, not the solution. It's only in the last paragraph that the solution comes up. So what that's really saying is that we really need to look at this very, very clearly. Now, that's very appropriate at the moment, because death is all around us. And so we need to look at what that means in accordance to how the Course sees it. So death is a thought, that takes many forms, often unrecognized. It may appear as sadness, fear, anxiety, or doubt, as anger, faithlessness, and a lack of trust. Concern for bodies, envy, and all forms in which the wish to be as you're not may come to tempt you. All such thoughts are but reflections of the worshipping of death as savior and giver of release. That's an incredible description of the human condition, that we look for death for release from life. No, not really. Release from hell that we thought was life. But it comes to a point where we need to be released from what we thought was life, because it really is hell. And that is what we use in place of salvation. We bow out because we've had enough. Embodiment of fear, the host of sin, God of the guilty, and the Lord of all illusions and deceptions, does the thought of death seem mighty. For it seems to hold all living things within its withered hand, all hopes and wishes in its blighting grasp. All goals perceive but this in its sightless eyes. The frail, the helpless, and the sick bow down before the image, thinking it alone is real, inevitable, worthy of their trust, and fear it alone will surely, for it alone will surely come. So it's the inevitability of death that seems to be the prominent condition of the human mind. It's inevitable. But what we've just seen there, what we just read there, it's not just death as mortality, it's death as fear of lack, sadness, loss, limitation, any kind of pain and fear and guilt and suffering is all the different forms of death. So little wonder, therefore, that we seek release. Unfortunately, we seek release in death. And so it is impossible to worship death in any form and still select a few you would not cherish and would yet avoid while still believing in the rest. No compromise is possible. For here again, we see an obvious position which we must accept if we're to, sorry about the light here, if we're to be sane, So The idea of death, right? The idea of death of God is so preposterous that even the insane have difficulty in believing it. For it implies that God was once alive and somehow perished, killed apparently by those who did not want him to survive. The stronger will could triumph over his, and so eternal way gave way to death. And with the Father died the Son as well. Death's worshippers may be afraid, and yet can thoughts like this be fearful? If they saw that it is only this which they believe, they would be instantly released. And you will show them this today. You will show them this today. This is your job now, to show the world and your brothers that there's no death. There is no death, and we renounce it now in all its forms for salvation of our own and for others. God made not death, whatever form it takes, must therefore be an illusion. This is the stand that we take today, and it is given us to look past death and see the life beyond. Okay. So there is no death. Why? There is no death because there is no sin. And that's the only reason. The only reason there is no death is because there actually is no sin. Sin is the cause of death. In other words, there is a cause and effect relationship. The wages of sin are death. And so there's a sin and there's a death, and that's the cause and effect relationship. So we eliminate one and we eliminate the other. Now we look around and we see death everywhere. At the moment we see it, but we also feel it and experience it. We perceive it in many different forms. And it's virtually unavoidable to this body and the senses to say, well, okay, I can accept the premise that if there is only the love of God, there is no death, but that's not an experience, it's just simply an acceptance. But it's the beginning. And that acceptance then leads to belief. But we need to go further than belief too. We need to come to an experience where we can see, oh, well, it's very clear, there's no death. So we begin with the idea that, and realize that there is no sin. Julian of Norwich said that we come to God through sin. This is an incredibly challenging statement. It took me a long, long time to understand what was being said there. And if you move from the alpha to the omega of that statement to the actual, the bottom line, if you will, what it really means, you can go through an awful lot of understanding and contemplation to reach that point. But the point that it's really saying is not that we go through death, that we go through death, or we go through sin, or we go into sin, or we indulge in sin. We see through sin. We see through sin there is no death. Woo! Right? We see there is no sin, there is no death. But we have to see it from that standpoint of the resurrection. We have to see it from above the battleground. So there is no sin. Now, we talked about this a little while ago. We talked about it at the finger. We said, okay, what is sin exactly? Well, it's the separation from God, isn't it? The idea, the belief that we're separate from God is sin. But are we separate from God? How could we be? Now, we can look at this very logically, and we can say, well, how could the form be be different, separated from the substance? And we looked at a glass, if you recall, a tumbler of water. And we said, well, now there's two things here. There's a substance, which is glass, and there's a form, which is the tumbler. Can they be separate? Obviously, they can't. But the fact is that no form can be separate from its substance. If there is a substance, there must be a form, unless that substance is completely and totally free of form, which is God. But all substance must take a form, and all form must certainly have a substance. So this form, this that is speaking now, as a substance, and if you recall, I said that that substance is life. Life animates this form, but life is God. So we can't separate life, God, from the form, from the effect. Now, again, that's very logical and understandable, and we can accept that, and we can even believe that. But it's not an experience. And if we're to be free from the idea completely of death, we have to have that experience. So we look at the idea of separation and we see that it's not true. And we look at the idea of sin and we can say, well, therefore, that is not true. There is no sin. But how do we know that? How do we actually realize that? Well, this is where we come to the experience. The experience of sin takes a form, and that form is guilt. Again, you can't separate the form from the substance. You can't separate the cause from the effect. And if the cause is sin and the effect is guilt, all we need to do is be free from guilt, to be free from sin, to be free from separation, to be free from death. And that's where the concentration comes. That's where the point is made. This is what the whole Course in Miracles is about. It's recognizing that the way through is to end guilt. Now, I hope the logic and the reason of that is clear, but the fact is that I did say that it's experiential. It's not just about a logical sequence of thinking and concepts, but it's a real experience. And that real experience comes when you're prepared to forgive, when you're prepared to let go of the idea that there is such a thing as guilt. And that you do in every holy encounter. And you say to your brother, give me your blessing, Holy Son of God. I will behold you with the eyes of Christ and see in you my perfect sinlessness. That's the prayer. But when the intention and the sincerity of that prayer is really there and felt and experienced, then we come closer to the end of the idea that there's such a thing as guilt. In other words, we set our brother free. We see beyond his sins, we see his sinlessness. And in seeing his sinlessness, we recognize and accept our own innocence. Okay, and that's where we discover that there is no death. And that now blinds us to the idea that there's such a thing as coronavirus and that people lose their lives. There's no loss of life. Nobody dies. And that the experience of sadness at loss is totally unreal. And the pain of sickness is totally unreal. And all these things, the fear, all of what it is that makes up what has been beautifully described in that lesson as death is not there. It's just all illusion. And that illusion is based on simply the fact that we feel guilty. And that is the cause of our problem. And the release from that problem is by giving the innocence to our brothers, and in doing so, accepting it ourselves. So I hope that that's reasonably clear, because that's the way out of the whole mess. And so I'll just look at something here, which is in the section on trust. This beautiful section. Sorry about the light here, I don't see too well. And finally, there's there's a period of achievement through all your forgiveness. It is here that learning is consolidated. Now, what is seen as merely shadows before become solid gains to be counted on in all emergencies as well as tranquil times. Indeed, the tranquility is the result. The outcome of honest learning, consistency of thought, and full transfer. This is the stage of real peace. For here, heaven's gate is fully reflected, and from here, the way to heaven is open and easy. In fact, it is here. Who would go anywhere if peace of mind is already complete? And who would seek to change tranquility for something more desirable? What could be more desirable than this? Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Eric.